When I married him, I never told my husband about the $54 million my father, a 4-star general, left me. Thank God I didn't. Because 11 days later, my MIL walked into my kitchen with a lawyer. Sign this, or you leave with nothing. She had no idea what she was asking me to sign away. The front door opened at 20 minutes to 9 on a Tuesday, and it opened with a key. Not a knock. A key. I was at the sink. I heard the deadbolt turn and 3 sets of shoes on the entry tile, and by the time I got the water off, my mother-in-law was standing in my kitchen with her purse still on her arm. Behind her came a man in a windbreaker pulled on over a polo shirt, reading glasses up in his hair. He set a briefcase on my table the way you set a bag on the counter at the post office. My sister-in-law came in last and leaned against the cabinets with her arms crossed. Derek came out of the bedroom with one boot laced and one not. Sharon poured herself coffee out of my pot. Then she set the mug down on the lid of my father's ammunition box. Steel box, olive drab, on the end of the table. Stenciled down the side in white block letters, Brubaker W. Her mug went down on top of it and put a wet ring across the B. Then she opened a blue folder and slid it at me with 2 fingers, a pen clipped to the front. Sign this, or you leave with nothing. 14 pages, colored tabs down the right edge. The last one said Exhibit B, and from where I stood, I could see through the stack that behind it there was one sheet of paper, and the sheet had nothing on it. Quick pause before we continue. I'm Clara, the woman behind this channel. I write these stories because I love that little moment when strangers from different places end up feeling the same thing. If this one already pulled you in, stay with me. It goes deeper from here. 14 pages, colored tabs down the right edge. The last one said Exhibit B, and from where I stood, I could see through the stack that behind it there was one sheet of paper, and the sheet had nothing on it. Can I read it? I said. There's nothing in it to read, Sharon said. Nobody was looking at me. Tricia was on her phone. The lawyer was looking out my window at the neighbor's fence, so I reached past the toaster and peeled a cork coaster off a stack that was still half in its shrink wrap. A wedding gift, 11 days old. I slid the coaster under her mug and set the mug back down on it. Then I picked up my father's box in both hands and moved it 6 inches over to my side of the table. It sweats, I said. She kept right on talking. Not one of them looked down. What she was saying while I did that was that this was how the family had always done things, that her own mother had signed one, that it was about the ground, and the ground was Ostmeyer ground, and no Ostmeyer had ever had to explain that to anybody before. The lawyer said his name was Dwight Sheldrake, and that his office was over the pharmacy on Cherokee Street. He said the word standard 4 times in about a minute. Standard language. Standard agreement. Perfectly standard. Tricia said, without looking up from her phone, "It's not personal." Derek stood in the doorway with the one boot flopping open and said nothing at all. He looked at the toaster. He looked at his mother. At one point, he crossed his arms and then uncrossed them and put his hands in his pockets. And that was the extent of what my husband did in his own kitchen. Sharon set the pen down flat on top of the folder, lined up with the edge, and she said, "Dwight will call you when he's ready for you. Don't make him call twice." Then she picked up her coffee, drank about half of it standing up, and left the mug on my coaster. The 3 of them went out through the front door, and Derek followed them onto the step, and I heard him say something in the low voice he uses for his mother. And I heard her say back, loud enough for the whole block, "Well, she can prove me wrong." Then I stood in that kitchen with the folder open in front of me and the box in front of the folder. There was a coffee ring on the lid, drying into the paint over the top of my father's last name. 11 days before that folder came into my kitchen, I got married in a fellowship hall on Delaware Street. It was a Saturday in the first week of October, 62 degrees, and the room had a drop ceiling and a stage at one end with a piano on it under a quilted cover. Sharon had done the food and she had done the flowers, and she made sure everybody knew she had done both. There were 41 people in that hall. 39 of them were his. Mine were 2. Peggy Dierks, who works the counter with me, and Peggy's husband, who fixed the thermostat in the ladies' room before the ceremony because Sharon asked him to on his way in. By the door, there was a card table with a white cloth on it, and Sharon had called it the memory table. Photographs in little frames. Derek's father, who died in 2016, both Ostmeyer grandmothers, a cousin who passed at 19, 9 frames, and a votive candle in front of each one, and a card in Sharon's handwriting that said, "In our hearts today." I had brought a frame. I had brought it 2 days early and set it on that table myself, in the second row, off to the left, small. My dad in a golf shirt in his kitchen in the spring, laughing at the dog holding a coffee cup. No uniform. He hated the uniform pictures. It wasn't on the table. I found it in the coat closet on the shelf above the hangers, laid face down on a stack of paper tablecloths. I asked her. I did ask. I walked over to where she was straightening a sleeve of cups, and I said, "Sharon, my dad's picture was on the memory table." She kept stacking cups. "It's a wedding, not a funeral," she said. "There's a limit." I put the frame in my purse. Then I went and stood where you stand, and I got married, and I meant every word of it, which is the part that is hard to say now. At the reception, she sat at the round table nearest the kitchen door with 4 women she has coffee with at church on Wednesday mornings. I came out of the kitchen carrying a sheet pan of bars, because that is what I do at a thing like that, and I came out on the side where they could not see me, and I heard her say it. Nobody from her side, not one. That tells you something. One of the women said something I couldn't catch, and Sharon said, "Oh, honey, I know exactly what it tells me." I set the pan down on the table and cut the bars and walked back into the kitchen. Here is what she thought that told her. My mother died when I was 19. My father died 2 Februaries ago, in a hospice house on 10th Street here in town, and he picked this town on purpose because Fort Leavenworth is the one place he was ever stationed where he came home for supper. He was a major then. I was born up on that hill. His name was Wendell Brubaker. He was born on a wheat place in Ellis County, Kansas, in a house with no phone in it. And he retired in 2004 with 4 stars on each shoulder. And if you drove past him at a gas station in a golf shirt, you would have thought he sold insurance. He was sick for 19 months. And for 19 months, I was the person in the room. I know what the ceiling tiles in that room looked like. There were 42 of them, and one was stained brown at the corner from a pipe, and I know that because you count things at 3 in the morning. I know his medication times better than I know my own phone number. I know which nurse he was polite to and which one he actually liked. I kept a spiral notebook on the window ledge, and I wrote down what he ate, and there were long stretches where the entry said half a cup of broth for 4 days in a row. Men came, colonels, mostly, and once a man who arrived by car from Washington and sat with him for an hour and left without saying his own name to me. They came for an afternoon and they cried in the parking lot and they went home. I stayed. And in the last month, on a Tuesday, he had me bring the box up from the trunk of my car. It was his, from Vietnam, and he'd hauled it through 9 moves with tools in it. He had me set it on the bed, and he put his hand flat on the lid, and he said the only piece of advice he ever gave me about money in my whole life. "Rachel, don't tell people what's in it. Once they know, you'll never find out what they'd have been." Then he said plainer, because he could see I was crying, "Never let anybody love you for it." So I didn't tell anybody. Not Peggy. not the girls at the store, not the man I married. For 2 years, I got up at 6 and stood behind a counter on 4th Street and taped boxes and notarized documents for strangers, because it was the only thing in my life that stayed the same shape after he died, and because he asked me not to, and I was going to be a person who kept her word to him. That is what nobody from her side meant. That night, after the folder, Derek sat down on the end of the bed to take the other boot off, and he had it in his hand, and he didn't put it down for a long time. "Just sign it," he said. "It's to make Mom feel better. It's not like there's anything on your side to protect." He fell asleep by 10:30. I went back out to the kitchen and turned on the light over the stove and sat down with the folder. Here is the thing none of them ever bothered to find out about me. I have worked 11 years behind the counter at a pack and ship on 4th Street. Boxes, postage, copies, passport photos against a blue screen taped to the wall. And for 11 of those years, I have been a commissioned notary public for the state of Kansas. 2 renewals. A stamp with my name on it in a plastic case in my apron pocket, and a bound journal with a red cover. 6,140 entries in that journal, the last I counted. Deeds, powers of attorney, titles, bills of sale for horse trailers. A woman who came in twice a year for 8 years to sign the same guardianship renewal and cried both times. I do not practice law, and I never have. What I do is read a document to find the signature blocks, the acknowledgement page, the initials line at the bottom of every sheet, and the exhibits. That's the job. Nobody hands you a document and lets you skip to the end. I have read 6,000 of them out of the corner of my eye at a counter with a line behind me. To the Ostmeyers, Rachel works at the copy shop. So at 11 o'clock at night, I sat down under the stove light with 14 pages, and it took me about 4 minutes to know what I was holding. The caption at the top said post-nuptial agreement, and the type was clean, and the margins were right, and it had been done by somebody who does this for a living. That was Sheldrake's part. Pages 1 through 9. Then the tabs. Exhibit A was a different typeface. Not slightly. Completely. Wider letters. The spacing off after every period because whoever typed it hit the space bar twice out of habit. The way people who learned on a typewriter do. There was a header line that had been left in from a template and not deleted. And at the very bottom of every one of those pages, in type so small you had to tilt it toward the light, was a file path. Documents. Sharon. Post-nup final 2. She typed the exhibits herself, on the computer in the church office, from the look of that path, at the desk where she does the Wednesday bulletin. Exhibit A ran 2.5 pages, and it was the most loving document I have ever read. It listed everything the Ostmeyers own that was going to stay Derek's, separate, untouchable. The 160 acres out on 207th Street, the machine shed, 2 grain bins, and the leg between them, a 1978 truck by Vin, a drill, a disc, the swather, the chest freezer on the back porch, which she itemized with the words, "Good working order" after it. She sat at that church desk and typed out a chest freezer. Then, Exhibit B, 1 sheet. At the top it said, Exhibit B, disclosure of wife, in her wide typeface, and the rest of the page was white. She had not left it for me to fill in. There was no line, no blank, no place to write. She had put a cover sheet in a legal document to say out loud, in the file, forever, that there was nothing on my side worth the paper. And on page 2, in Sheldrake's clean type, in the recitals and the language that comes with the template, and that nobody in that kitchen had read since it left his printer, each party acknowledges that the other has provided a full and fair written disclosure of all separate property and assets, annexed here too as Exhibit A and Exhibit B. I read that line, and then I read Article 4. Article 4 was one sentence, 11 lines long. Each party irrevocably waives, releases, and disclaims any and all right, title, interest, or claim in, and to the separate property of the other, whether now owned or hereafter acquired, including without limitation any inheritance, devise, bequest, interest in trust, and any appreciation thereof, whether now owned or hereafter acquired, interest in trust. I put both hands flat on the table, on either side of that page, and I sat there in my own kitchen at 10 after 11 at night, and I did not move for a while. Sharon Ostmeyer had gone to a lawyer, paid him what a man over a pharmacy charges, and had him build a wall to keep me away from 160 acres of wheat ground and a chest freezer. And she had written the wall so it ran both directions. The next morning, she came into the store. She came in at 10:15 on a Wednesday, which is the church coffee morning. So she came in with her coat still buttoned and her keys in her hand, and about 11 minutes of time to spend. I had a customer at the counter, a man in his 70s, from out by Lansing, shipping a rifle scope back to a company in Iowa. And he was doing the thing where he tells you the whole story of the scope while you tape the box. Sharon did not get in line. She came up alongside the counter to the spot where the pens are, and she said it right over his shoulder. "Dwight's waiting on you, Rachel." And I'll tell you what I told Derek. If a person's got nothing to hide, a person signs. The man with the scope looked at the counter. I ran the tape gun down the seam and turned the box and ran it down the other seam and said, "He knows where I work." "You'll want your license when he calls," she said. "They won't stamp it without a license." "I know," I said. She looked at me for a second like she was going to add something, and then she left, and the bell over the door did what it does. The man with the scope said, "That your mother?" "My husband's," I said. He said, "Ah," and got out his wallet, and I have thought about that "ah" more than once since. Peggy Dierks was at the other station with her back to us, running a stack of church directories through the copier. She is 58, and she has been a notary in this county 22 years, and she was the one who trained me on the journal my first week. She did not turn around. She waited until Sharon's car was out of the lot. Then she said, still facing the copier, "Rachel, what's she after?" "Paperwork," I said. "Uh-huh," Peggy said. Tuesday, Tricia had come by the house with a tape measure. She had come by to drop off a casserole dish, she said, which was a dish I had never seen before in my life, and while I was in the kitchen with it, she went down the hall. I came out, and she was in the back bedroom with the tape hooked on the far baseboard, walking backward toward the door and paying the tape out with her thumb. 11:04, she said. "Huh. Tricia, Mom said this room's just sitting empty," she said, and she thumbed the button and the tape snapped back into the case. "I'm not saying anything. I'm looking." She walked out past me and picked up her keys off the counter and said, "You should really just get it over with. Everybody's on your side, you know? It's just a piece of paper." Thursday morning, I drove out to the grain elevator lot on the edge of town, the one with the wide gravel where the semis turn around, and I parked facing the tracks, and I called a number in Kansas City. Gwen Ackerman has handled my father's trust since 2011. She is the person who calls me every February to say the annual statement is coming and to ask if I want it mailed or if I want to come sit down. I have gone down there exactly twice in 2 years, and both times I parked in a garage and took an elevator and signed 2 things and drove home and went to work the next day. I put her on speaker and set the phone on the dash. I read her Article 4 out loud, the whole 11 lines, sitting in my car in a gravel lot with a grain leg running 200 yards away. Gwen did not say anything for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Read me the recital again." "Page 2. I read it. And what's in Exhibit B? Nothing, I said. It's a blank page. It's got a title and nothing under it. Whose title? Hers. She typed the exhibits. Gwen Ackerman is 50-some years old, and I have never once heard her raise her voice. She said very evenly, Rachel, listen to me. If he signs Article 4, he's out. Permanently, not divorced out, not half. He is waiving any interest in your separate property, including anything held in trust and any growth on it now or later. And it says, irrevocably, I know what it says. And they wrote it. His mother typed part of it and her lawyer wrote the rest. 4 seconds again. How long have you been married? Gwen said. 12 days, she said. Don't sign anything today. Call me the morning you go in. The whole call was 5 minutes and 20 seconds. I know because it was still on the screen when I got out of the car. That afternoon, I called Sheldrake's office from the back room at the store and asked his secretary for the disclosure schedules. Her name is Kathy, and she has worked over that pharmacy for a long time, and she is nice to everybody. The what, hun? The disclosure schedules, Exhibit A and Exhibit B. I'd like to see them before I come in. Oh, Kathy said. Oh, the attachments. Mrs. Ostmeyer brought those in herself. Dwight didn't do those. She had them all done up when she came in. Is there a B? Paper moving. There's a cover for it, she said. That's all that's in here. I said thank you and hung up and stood in that back room between a pallet of boxes and the shrink wrap machine. Then I got a legal pad off the shelf, and I went out front and I started writing. It took me 2 evenings, 4 pages when I was done, typed clean, single-spaced, in my own words, with a heading at the top that said, Disclosure of Separate Property of Wife, and my full name under it, Rachel Ann Ostmeyer, née Brubaker. Every line of it true, every line of it complete, the trust by its full legal name and its date, the land in Ellis and Rush counties, by section and county. The account numbers ending in 4 digits, the valuation date, the number at the bottom, in figures and in words, the way you write a number when you want to be sure nobody can say later that they misread it. 54,200,000 and change. I read it 4 times, and I did not soften one word of it because a disclosure that is soft is not a disclosure. Saturday morning, before the store opened, Peggy stood at the far end of the counter with her stamp out and her red journal open, because a notary cannot notarize her own signature, and there is exactly one other notary I would have asked. She read the heading. She read the first page. She got about 4 lines into the second, and she stopped and looked up at me over her glasses, and she did not say a single word for a long moment. Then she said the only technical sentence anybody said to me in this whole thing, and she said it quiet. The way you say something to a person across a counter you have stood at for 11 years. Rachel, you want this in his lawyer's hand before your husband picks up that pen, not after. I know, I said. She stamped it. Line 6,141, in her handwriting, in the red book. I put the 4 pages in a manila envelope, and I licked it and sealed it and pressed the flap down with the heel of my hand, and I wrote across the front in marker, Exhibit B, Disclosure of Wife. That night, the envelope sat on my kitchen table next to my father's box, in a house where 2 other people came and went. Nobody opened it, nobody picked it up. Derek moved it once to set down a plate. Sunday dinner at the Ostmeyer place is at noon, and it does not move. The home place is out on 207th Street, going toward Easton, 22 minutes from my driveway if you catch the light on Metropolitan. White house, screened back porch, 2 bins, and a machine shed, and a windbreak of cedars that Derek's grandfather put in the year Kennedy died, which is a thing I have been told at that table 9 separate times. I came home from work on Saturday and knew before I had my coat off that she had been in the house. The couch pillows were turned. The dish drainer was empty and dry. My father's box was not on the end of the table where it lives, and the manila envelope, which I had left square in the middle of that table with my own name on it in marker, had been moved to the counter and set under the fruit bowl. Derek said she was just picking up some things to run out to the farm. He said it the way you say a thing you have already decided is nothing. So on Sunday, I drove out. There were 9 of us. Sharon, at the end, nearest the stove, because that is her chair. Trisha's 2 boys. Derek, a neighbor couple who come most Sundays and eat and say almost nothing, which I have always respected. And Merle. Merle Ostmeyer is Derek's uncle, 71, and he lives in the trailer past the shed, and has farmed that ground his whole life except for 4 years he did not choose. He wears a seed cap indoors and takes it off to eat, and puts it back on before he stands up. Nobody said one word about the folder for the first 40 minutes. That is not how it works. What happens instead is that a version gets built around the table while you sit there eating out of a bowl that somebody passed you. The version was that I was stalling. Sharon put it out first, to the neighbor lady, not to me. "It's been 10 days, she said. 10 days on a standard agreement. Now I'm not saying anything." Trisha said, "A person who's got nothing to hide signs it Tuesday." The neighbor lady said the potatoes were good. And Derek, my husband of 16 days, sitting on my left with his elbow next to mine, said, "Rachel, it's not like there's anything on your side to protect." Word for word. His mother's sentence out of his mouth, at his mother's table, with his mother 2 chairs down nodding into her plate. That is when it stopped being about the paper for me. A grown man will take a sentence off somebody and carry it around and say it in front of people and never once notice. It is not his. I said, "The potatoes are good, Donna." That was all I said for the rest of the meal. After the plates, Sharon stood up and said she had something to take care of while everybody was here, and she went into the front room and came back carrying a box and set it on the table in front of me. It was our wedding gifts. The mixer still in the sleeve, 2 sets of towels, a gift card in an envelope with a bow on it, the little glass birds from the neighbor couple's daughter. She went back and got a second box and set that one down too. And there were 4 boxes total by the time she was done, and she stacked them so they made a wall between me and the rest of the table. "Since we don't know how long this is going to be," she said, "I'd rather these sit out here." Nobody moved. Trisha's older boy, who is 9, looked at the mixer and then at his mother and then at nothing. "They were addressed to us," I said. "They were addressed to the family," Sharon said. Merle put his cap back on. "Here is what I did." I said, "Okay." Then I picked up the top box, which was the towels, and carried it out to my car and put it in the trunk and came back and got the second one. I made 4 trips through that kitchen with everybody sitting there, and I did not slam one door. On the 3rd trip is when I saw the burn pile. The Ostmeyers burn out past the porch steps in a bare ring of dirt they have used for 60 years. There was a pile going, waiting on a still day. Cardboard, a busted lawn chair, a roll of ruined carpet. The box of water heater came in. And on top of that pile, sitting square, olive drab, was my father's ammunition box. She had not thrown it. That is what I want you to understand. It was set on their level, on top of the carpet roll, the way you set something down that you have carried across a yard. I put the gift box I was holding down on the porch step. Then I walked out to the pile in my church shoes, and I picked my father's box up in both hands, and the bottom of it was already gritty from the ash under the carpet. And I turned around and walked back with it. The screen door was full of them by then. Sharon, Trisha, the neighbor lady behind her. Derek standing back in the kitchen where I could see the shape of him. I came up the steps and Merle held the screen door open for me with 2 fingers. And as I went past him, he read the side of that box out loud, slow, because that is how a man reads stenciled letters. Brubaker, W. Then he stopped, with his hand still on the door. Brubaker, he said again. Wendell Brubaker, that's a Kansas boy. Ellis County, 4 stars. The kitchen went a particular kind of quiet. Not shocked, just the quiet of people waiting to be told whether something matters. And Sharon said, I know he's dead. That was it. That was her whole answer, said in her own kitchen with her arms crossed. Merle looked at her, and then at me. And then he let go of the screen door, and it shut on its spring. I put the box on the passenger seat of my car, seatbelt across it, and I went back in and finished carrying the gifts out, because I was not going to leave with 3 of the 4. Before I left, I walked out to the machine shed to find Merle, because he had gone out there. He was standing at the workbench, doing nothing in particular, which is what men do in a shed when they want to be found. She's not usually like that, he said. She's exactly like that, I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. Then he told me, and he told it plain, the way you would tell somebody the price of fuel. The 80 across the road came up for sale in August. Sharon has wanted it since 1991. The plan was to borrow against the home place to get it. And the plan was to put the 80 in Trisha's name. Because Trisha moved back after her divorce, and Trisha is the one who is going to stay. And the bank in Lansing had looked at the file in September and come back with a condition, because Derek's name is on the deed to the home quarter along with his mother's, and Derek had gone and gotten married 11 days before they wanted to close. They want the marital paper, Merle said, signed, stamped in the file. It's a checklist item. There's a closing date on it. When? I said. He looked at the bench. End of the month. I stood in that shed with the smell of diesel and old twine, and I did the arithmetic, and it came out very simple. None of it was ever about protecting anything from me. She had a date on a calendar and a box on a form, and I was the empty box. And she came into my kitchen with a lawyer at 20 to 9 on a Tuesday, because a bank in Lansing wanted a piece of paper by the end of the month. I said, Merle, does Derek know that's why? Merle Ostmeyer is 71 years old, and he has known that boy since the day he was born, and he did not answer me. He picked a wrench up off the bench and set it down about 4 inches from where it had been. I drove home on 207th with the windows down and my father's box belted into the seat beside me, and ash on my hands from the carpet roll. I got that box out and set it on the kitchen table where it goes, and I got a rag and I cleaned the ash off the bottom and out of the stencil, and it took me a while, because the letters have a lip and things get down in there. Then I stood there with the rag in my hand, looking at the manila envelope, which was still on the counter, under the fruit bowl, where a woman with a key had put it. Monday morning, at 4 minutes after 8, the phone rang at the store, before we had the lights all the way on. It was Kathy, from over the pharmacy. "Hon, Dwight can do Friday at 10, she said. "There'll be 4 of you. Bring a photo ID, and it needs to be current, not expired. They get picky." I said, "Friday at 10. 10, she said. "Second floor, the door with the frosted glass. The stairs are on the outside of the building, the ones off the alley." Derek left on Monday night. He did not leave the way people leave in an argument. He came home at 6, ate, watched 40 minutes of a game, and then went into the bedroom and got the duffel out of the closet, and I stood in the doorway and watched him roll socks. "Just for a couple weeks," he said. "There's a bunch to do out there, and Merle's back is bad." "Okay," I said. "It's not a thing," he said. He took the good pillow. That is the detail I kept. A man who is coming back in 2 weeks does not take the good pillow off the bed. He stopped at the kitchen table on his way out, and he stood there a second with the duffel on his shoulder, and he looked at the manila envelope which I had put back in the middle of the table where it belonged. He did not pick it up. He did not ask what was in it. He read the front of it, my own handwriting, Exhibit B, Disclosure of Wife, 4 inches from his hand, and he said, "You don't have to make it a whole production, Rach." Then he kissed the side of my head and left, and the storm door did the thing it does where it catches and then closes on its own. Tuesday, Wayne cut my hours. Wayne Lampe has owned that store 19 years. He is not a cruel man. He is a man who does not like a conversation, and he had one with me at the back counter with the schedule in his hand and the shrink wrap machine running. 36 hours to 14. "It's slow," he said. It was the 3rd week of October. It is never slow the 3rd week of October. We had a pallet of holiday boxes coming Thursday. "Wayne, it's just how it shook out this month," he said, and he put the schedule up on the corkboard with a red pin and went in the back. Peggy watched him go. Then she came over and stood next to me looking at that corkboard. "Sunday," she said. "After church, somebody talked to him in the parking lot." "You saw it?" "I saw who?" Peggy said. 14 hours is $400 and some a month before anything comes out. Understand that I could have paid off that store, the building, the pallet of holiday boxes, and Wayne's pickup by Thursday afternoon with one phone call. And I stood there and looked at a red pin in a corkboard and felt my stomach drop like anybody else's would. That is what my father's rule costs. It is not free. You do not get to have the money and the ordinary life at the same time. And there is a week in this where I found out exactly how much of me had chosen ordinary on purpose. Wednesday, the church directory came out. It is a stapled booklet, gray cover, and it comes out twice a year, and it is done at the desk in the church office on the computer with the file path in the footer. Sharon has run it since 2009. Peggy ran the copies, 600 pages through our machine, on our paper at the church rate, which is nothing, because that is how a town works. She brought me one at 10 in the morning and put it face down on the counter and said, "You don't need to look at this." So I looked at it. Under O, it said Oostmeer, Sharon. It said Oostmeer, Derek, 1140 Ottawa St. It said Oostmeer, Kuhlman, Tricia, and the boys' names under hers. That is my address, 1140 Ottawa Street. It has my dish towels in it and my father's box on the table. There was no line for me. Not a wrong name, not a misspelling. There has never been a Rachel in that book, and now there was an address in it with one name on it. Peggy said, "I can reprint it." "Don't," I said. "It's 400 copies. You'd be doing it to make me feel better, and I'd still know." Wednesday afternoon, the phone did the other thing. I got out of the car after work and looked at it, and the family thread was gone, off the top of my messages. Not muted. Gone. You were removed from Ostmeyer Farm. There had been 11 people in that thread, and I had been in it since the spring, and I had been the one who found the tent for the boy's birthday in it. And now it was a gray line that said a thing had happened to me instead of a thing I was in. Thursday, I worked a short shift and got home at 10 after 6. It was one of those October evenings where the light is already going orange and everybody's sprinklers running because the ground is still dry. I put my key in the front door of 1140 Ottawa Street, and it went in about a third of the way and stopped. I looked at it. You do that. You pull the key out and look at it like the key is the part that changed. Then I looked at the deadbolt, and the finish on it was wrong. It was brighter than the knob. New brass against 11-year-old brass, and there were 2 little bare spots in the paint on the jamb where a drill had walked. I went around back, and that one was new too. The porch light came on across the street, and Dave Wenzel came out on her step in a cardigan with her arms folded, because Dee is 74 and has lived on that street since 1979 and watches it the way other people watch television. "They came about 1," she called over. "2 of them, in a white van. Your mother-in-law let them in and stood in the yard the whole time." "Okay," I said. "Rachel, is everything all right?" "It's fine, Dee." She stood there a minute longer, and then she said, "There's a bag on your porch," and went in. There was. Black contractor bag, 30-gallon, sitting on the boards to the right of the door, and the sprinkler on the corner of the lot had been going, and it had been hitting the low end of that porch for 2 hours. So the bag was soaked, and there was a dark spread of water out from under it across the boards. It was heavy in the middle and had corners. I did not open it out there. I picked it up with both arms, and water came out of the bottom of it and ran down the front of my work shirt. And I carried it to my car and put it in the trunk and shut the lid. And I sat in the driver's seat in my own driveway in front of a house I could not get into. And I did not cry, because Dee Wenzel was still standing at her window. I got a room at the motel out on 4th, North End, $49, because the good one wanted $89. I carried the bag in and set it in the bathtub and cut it open with my keys. The mixer was in there, 2 sets of towels, the little glass birds, and one of them was broken. My work shoes, a hairbrush, the good pillow. She had taken the good pillow off the bed at the farm and put it in a garbage bag, which means it had already been out there and come back. This is why I love making these stories. People think silence means weakness until the proof is already in the room. Stay with me. We're right at that point. My work shoes, a hairbrush, the good pillow. She had taken the good pillow off the bed at the farm and put it in a garbage bag, which means it had already been out there and come back. And at the bottom, on its side, my father's box. The stencil was running. I do not know what she had used on it, or if it was just 2 hours of sprinkler on paint that has been on steel since 1969. But the white had gone soft and gray at the edges, and there was a pale streak running down off the B and off the W, like the letters had bled. I got a towel off the rack, the thin kind they give you, and I sat down on the edge of that bathtub in a motel on 4th Street, and I dried my father's box. The lid first, then the sides. Then I turned it and got the water out of the lip where the gasket is, and I ran the corner of the towel down into the letters, careful, going with the paint and not against it, because you can take stencil off with a thumbnail if you are stupid about it. It took me 20 minutes. I did not open it. I have not opened that box since the February he died. My phone rang at 10 after 8. "Where are you?" Derek said. "The motel on 4th. A pause. I could hear the television at the farm behind him, and I could hear his mother's voice in another room. Not the words. "Mom said the locks were about insurance," he said. I did not answer that. "Rach, just sign it tomorrow, and this all goes away. That's all it is. You sign it and everything goes back to normal." I said, 10 o'clock. "Right," he said, and he sounded relieved. And that is the last thing my husband ever said to me on a telephone that he thought was a small thing. I hung up and set the phone on the nightstand face down. Friday morning, I was up at 5 because you are. I ironed a blouse on a motel bed with a towel under it. I ate a gas station banana in the car in the lot at 9. And I called Gwen Ackerman. "You're going in," she said. 10 o'clock. "Anything about the disclosure changed?" "No. 4 pages, notarized, sealed. It's on the seat next to me." She said, "Then I'll be here all day. Call me when you're out, whatever it says." At 9:52, I parked on Cherokee Street. The stairs to Dwight Sheldrake's office run up the outside of the building off the alley, iron with a pipe rail, and the pharmacy exhaust fan blows across the landing. I went up them with my father's ammunition box under my left arm, dry, the letters still bleeding, and the sealed manila envelope lying flat on top of the lid with my hand over it so the wind off the alley would not take it. The office over the pharmacy is 2 rooms and a hallway that smells like the store below it. Kathy sits at a desk by the door with a fish tank on the file cabinet behind her, and past her, there is a room with a table that seats 6 and a window unit in the wall, and a print of a mallard coming down on water. They were already there when I came in at 3 minutes to 10. Sharon, at the end nearest the window in her good coat. Tricia, beside her. Derek across from them both with his hands flat on the table like a man in a waiting room. Dwight Sheldrake stood up and shook my hand and said, "Mrs. Ostmeyer." I set my father's box down on the table in front of my chair, and I set the sealed manila envelope on top of the lid, and I sat down. Sharon looked at the box for about a second and a half, and then decided not to say anything about it, which I believe was the single largest act of restraint of her life. Sheldrake had the 14 pages out in 2 stacks. "Duplicate originals," he said. 1 for each party. He had the colored tabs on both. "I'll walk through it," he said. "You don't have to," I said. "I've read it." That landed a little strange in the room. Sharon made a small noise. Tricia looked up from her phone for the first time. "I read it Tuesday night, and I read it again Wednesday," I said. "I've got no questions on the language." Sheldrake said, "Well, all right then," and pushed the first stack across to me. Here is the part I have gone over the most since. I could have fought it. I have thought about the version of that morning where I put my hand flat on those pages and said no, and made them take me to a courthouse in a county where their name is on a road sign. With a lawyer, I would have had to explain myself to first. I did not want to win an argument with Sharon Osmeyer. There is no winning an argument with her. She has been having the same argument since 1978, and she has never lost one because she does not have arguments. She has verdicts. So I did what a notary does, which is exactly what the document says to do. I took the pen out of my purse, mine black, the one I use at the counter, and I started initialing. Not signing. Initialing. Bottom right corner of every page, RAO, dated, the way the initials line on the bottom of every page in that document told both parties to do, in the small print that comes with the template and that nobody in that room had ever once looked at. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Sharon said, "Rachel, you don't have to sit there and read it again. We've been through this." "I'm not reading it," I said. "I'm initialing it." Page 4, page 5. The window unit cycled on. Somebody's cart went by down on the sidewalk. Page 9, which was the last page of Sheldrake's part. Then the tab. Exhibit A, Sharon's typeface, the wide letters, the double spaces, the 160 acres, and the 2 bins and the 1978 truck and the chest freezer in good working order. I initialed the first page of it. Then I stopped, with the pen still down, and I asked the only question I asked that morning. "Does he need to initial Exhibit A too?" Sheldrake had been half turned toward the window. He came back around and looked at the stack. "Does he—" "Yes," he said. "Yes, he does. Both parties initial every page. It says so at the bottom." "Good catch." He said it a little embarrassed, the way a man does when the woman from the copy shop finds the thing he missed. He slid Derek's stack over and tapped it. "Derek, bottom right, all of them." And my husband, who had not read one word of it, picked up a pen off his mother's lawyer's table and initialed all 14 pages of a document, acknowledging that both parties had made full and fair written disclosure of everything they owned. DWO, 14 times. It took him about 90 seconds. Then I picked up the envelope off the lid of my father's box, and I put it on the table in front of Sheldrake, and I said the sentence I have said across a counter 400 or 500 times in 11 years. That's my disclosure. It goes in the file. He picked it up. He turned it over. It was sealed, and it had Exhibit B, disclosure of wife, across the front in my handwriting, and a notary seal embossed through the flap where Peggy had run her crimp. This is Exhibit B, I said. Page 2 says each party's provided one. There wasn't a B in the folder. That's mine. 4 pages. Everything I have is in there. Sharon laughed. I want to be accurate about this because it is the whole hinge of everything that came after, and there were 4 other people in the room who heard it. She laughed out loud, and she said, "Oh, honey, I'm sure it is." Tricia made a sound through her nose, and Sharon said, to the lawyer, not to me, waving 2 fingers at the envelope like she was sending back a plate, "Dwight, we don't need to sit here and go through her bank statements." I said, "You can open it. It's right here. It'll take 4 minutes." "Let's just get it done," Sharon said. So Dwight Sheldrake, of Sheldrake Law, 2nd floor, Cherokee Street, took a sealed envelope he had never looked inside of, ran the 3-hole punch through the left margin of it, and put it in the folder behind the tab that said Exhibit B, in both originals, in front of everyone. Then we signed. I signed first, because I was the one they were there for. Rachel Ann Ostmeyer, in full on the signature page, twice, once, on each original. Derek signed under Article 4. He did not read it. He put his elbow on the table and leaned on it and wrote his name and pushed the stack back. Kathy came in from the front with her stamp and her journal and took our licenses and looked at each one and looked at each of our faces, which is the part most people rush, and she did not rush it. She filled her journal in longhand while the 4 of us sat there. Date, time, document type, both names, both license numbers. I watched her do it. She did it right. I have never been so glad to watch somebody do a thing right. Sharon stood up before the ink was dry and put her purse on her arm. "There," she said. "Was that so hard?" Tricia took a photo of the signature page with her phone, angled to get the whole thing in, and I watched her send it to somebody before we were out of the room. Down on the sidewalk on Cherokee Street, Sharon stopped and turned around to me because she was not going to let it end without one more. "Now," she said, "that's family taken care of. Derek's going to stay out at the place through harvest, and you can just get yourself settled. And when you've got a minute, I'd like those gift boxes back out of your trunk because Deb's asking about her mixer." Derek was standing 4 feet behind her, looking at a truck going by. I said, "Okay, Sharon?" I put my father's box on the passenger seat and belted it in, and I got on 73, and then I-70, and I drove to Kansas City with my copy of that agreement in a plastic sleeve on top of it. Gwen Ackerman's floor is the 11th floor. It has carpet that eats sound and a window that looks at the river the wrong way. She took the agreement out of the sleeve, and she read Article 4 standing up. Then she sat down and turned to the recital on page 2 and read that. Then she went to the back and put her thumb on the initials on Exhibit A, all 14 of them, D-O, in pencil blue ink, and she went through the stack page by page with her finger without saying anything, and she stopped at the envelope, punched into the file with the seal crimped through the flap. "He initialed this," she said, "with it sealed. Everybody in that room did. And you told him what was in it." I told all of them. I offered to open it on the table. Gwen Ackerman put her hand flat on that folder and looked out the window at the river for a second. Then she said, "Rachel, the only thing on this earth that could have come back at you later is a man standing up and saying, "Nobody told me." You handed it to his lawyer, sealed, notarized, on the record, before he picked up a pen. She tapped the tab. It's in his own file, in his own initials. The whole thing took 15 minutes. She made 2 copies, one for the trust file and one for the bank's, and I was back in the parking garage before 3. On the way home, I stopped in Easton at the co-op, because on the 4th day of my marriage, standing at that same counter, Derek had slid a form at me and said it was so I could pick up parts, and I had signed it. Because you do. 4 days in. It was a joint open account. Fertilizer, chemical, fuel, $41,000 carried on it in August, in his name and mine. I asked the girl at the counter for the form to come off it. She had to go get the manager, and the manager had to go find the file, and it took 25 minutes standing at a counter that smells like seed corn, and at the end of it, I signed one line, and my name came off an open account for $41,000, owed by a family that had changed my locks the day before. I did not tell anybody I did that either. It was not a threat, and it was not revenge. It was a woman taking her name off a debt in a family that had just put in writing that we did not share anything. Then I drove back to Leavenworth, and I got a room by the week over on Osage, and I went to work Monday for 14 hours, and I taped boxes, and 9 days went by. 9 days. I want you to know how quiet 9 days is when you have been erased out of a family of 11. Nobody called me. Not my husband, not once. Peggy brought me soup on a Wednesday and did not ask a single question, which is the kindest thing anybody did to me that whole month. On the 9th day, at 20 minutes to 8 in the evening, my phone rang with a number I did not have saved. I could hear a car around him. He was driving, or he was parked with it running. "Mrs. Osmeyer," Dwight Sheldrake said. "It's Dwight. Dwight Sheldrake." "I know." There was a long breath on that line, the kind a man takes when he has been sitting in a car working out how to start. "Mrs. Ostmeyer," he said. I opened Exhibit B. He had opened it because of the bank. That is the whole reason. The loan officer in Lansing had a checklist, and item 9 on the checklist was executed marital property agreement with disclosures, and Kathy was assembling the file to send over, and she brought him a folder with a sealed envelope, 3-hole punched into the back of it, and asked him what she was supposed to do with that. So he cut it open with a letter knife at his desk at 6 in the evening on a Wednesday, and he read 4 pages, and then he read them again, and then he sat in his car. "Mrs. Ostmeyer," he said, "I'm going to need to speak with my client, and I'd ask you to be there." "When?" "Tuesday morning, 9. A pause. "Your mother-in-law wants to do it at the house on Ottawa Street." Of course she did. Because when Dwight Sheldrake called Sharon Osmeyer and said, in that careful voice, that a serious issue had come up regarding Exhibit B, she heard exactly what she had been waiting 11 days to hear. She heard that the girl from the copy shop had been caught. She heard vindication with a lawyer attached to it. And she picked her kitchen. My kitchen. The one with her locks on it. I know she heard it that way because when I pulled up at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, there were 4 cars at 1140 Ottawa Street. Sharon's, Trisha's, Sheldrake's, and Merle's truck, with Merle standing out front of it, not going in yet. And in the passenger seat of Sharon's car, being helped out of it by Sharon herself, was Elaine Grafe, 70, who has coffee with her at the church on Wednesday mornings, and who was at the round table by the kitchen door at my wedding. She brought a friend. She brought an audience to my kitchen to watch me get taken apart. I got out with my father's box under my arm. The door was unlocked, and I walked into my own front room and back to my own kitchen, where 5 people were sitting around my table, in my chairs. The coffee was made. She had made it in my pot. There was a mug in front of each of them, and the cork coasters were out of the shrink wrap now, one under every mug. Because Sharon had gotten a look at the finish on that table and decided somebody had to be sensible about it. Derek was in the chair by the wall. He had come in from the farm and he had not shaved, and he looked at me and then away. I did not sit down right away. I walked to the middle of that table, moved the sugar bowl about 8 inches, and set my father's ammunition box down in the center of it, where everybody could see all 4 sides. Then I sat. Sharon started, because of course she did. "Well," she said, "Dwight has something he wants to say, and Rachel, I want you to know that whatever this is, I'm not a person who holds a grudge. If you'd just been up front with us at the beginning—" "Sharon," Sheldrake said. He said it in a voice I had not heard him use. He had his folder open in front of him and both hands flat on the table on either side of it, and he was pale in a way that a 61-year-old man over a pharmacy gets pale. "Sharon, I need you to be quiet and let me get through this." Elaine Grafe looked at her coffee. He took out 4 pages and set them face up in front of his own client. Then he turned the 14-page agreement toward her and put his finger on Article 4. And he read it out loud, all 11 lines, in my kitchen. Each party irrevocably waives, releases, and disclaims any and all right, title, interest, or claim in, and to the separate property of the other, whether now owned or hereafter acquired, including without limitation any inheritance, devise, bequest, interest in trust, and any appreciation thereof. Then he said, "Sharon, do you understand what your son signed?" "He signed what you drew up," she said. "He signed the agreement. She signed the agreement. That was the point of it." "Yes," Sheldrake said. "It runs both directions. It always ran both directions. That is what a marital property agreement is. It's about the ground. It is about all separate property of both parties," he said, "including inheritance, including any interest in trust, including appreciation, irrevocably." He turned the 4 pages around with 2 fingers so they faced her. "Sharon, this is Exhibit B." She looked down at it. I watched my mother-in-law read the words, Brubaker Family Trust. I watched her go down the page past the sections and townships in Ellis County and Rush County. I watched her get to the bottom of page 4 where there is a number written first in figures, and then, underneath, in words. Because that is how you write a number when you want to be certain nobody can claim later that they misread it. 54,200,000 and change. Her mouth moved. She was reading it in words. Trisha leaned over to see, and I watched my sister-in-law's face do the thing where the color goes out of it, and then comes back too much at once. She said, "That's not," and stopped. Derek stood up. He did not say anything. He walked 2 steps to the counter and put his hand on it. And Elaine Grafe, who had been brought along to watch me get taken apart in my own kitchen, said quietly, into the middle of all of it, "Sharon, is that her father?" "Yes," I said. "Wendell Brubaker." Merle was in the doorway. He had come in behind everybody and he had not sat down. He said, "I told you. Ellis County, 4 stars." And he said it to no one in particular and then went back to looking at the floor. Sharon put both hands flat on my table. "Then we tear it up," she said. Sheldrake said, "You cannot tear it up." He didn't know. He initialed every page. Sheldrake's voice cracked a little on that. "Sharon, I put that envelope in the file in front of him. She told the room what was in it. She offered to open it on the table, and you told me we didn't need to go through her bank statements. I heard you say it. Kathy heard it from the doorway. She tricked us." And that was the moment I said the only thing I said in that kitchen. I said, I told you it was everything I have. You laughed and said you were sure. Nobody had anything for that. Sharon looked at Trisha, and Trisha was looking at her phone in her lap the way a person looks at a phone when there is nothing on it. She looked at Derek's back at the counter. She looked at Elaine, and Elaine Grave picked her purse up off the floor and put it in her lap and held it there with both hands, which in this town is how a woman tells you she is going to be leaving soon, and she is going to be telling this at coffee on Wednesday. Sharon lost that room in about 9 seconds, at her own table, in front of the exact person she brought to see her win. Then I reached over and I opened my father's box. I had not opened it since February 2 years ago. The gasket sticks, and the latch has to be lifted with a thumb. Inside there is not much. A spiral notebook with a green cover, gone soft, with 19 months of a man's medication times, and what he ate in my handwriting, and a lot of pages where the entry is half a cup of broth. A small zip bag with 4 metal stars in it, dulled. The pins bent on one of them. A folded page from a law office in Kansas City with a heading that says Certification of Trust, dated, with my name on it as sole beneficiary. That page had been in that box, on that table under her coffee cup for 11 days, and a piece of notepaper, folded once with 3 lines on it in ballpoint, written by a man who could not hold a pen well anymore, which is why the letters run downhill. I read it out loud because it was the only thing anybody was going to hear in that kitchen worth hearing. Rachel, don't tell them. If they're the right ones, they'll never need to know. Dad. I folded it back on its crease and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I closed the box and latched it and picked it up. And I stood. And there was a good deal of chair noise. And I said, Dwight, send anything to the address on the disclosure. Here is what happened after, and I'm going to keep it short because none of it is the part that mattered. The 80 acres across the road from the home place sold in December to a man from Atchison. The bank in Lansing did not close the loan because Derek would not sign the personal guarantee once he understood what his mother had put in front of him. And no bank was going to lend that money to a 66-year-old woman on her own signature. Trisha still lives at the home place. She got the back bedroom she measured, just not the one she thought. Derek called me 11 times in one afternoon at the end of October. I did not answer. He hired his own lawyer in Kansas City, a good one, and that lawyer looked at Article 4 and at the recital on page 2 and at 14 sets of initials in Derek's own hand, and told him what Gwen told me, which is that a man cannot stand up and say nobody told him when the disclosure is stapled into his own file. The marriage lasted 11 days. The divorce took 4 months and was heard in the courthouse on 4th Street in Leavenworth County, 8 blocks from the counter where I have taped boxes for 11 years. It was uncontested. The agreement governed. The trust was never once mentioned in open court because it did not have to be. The paper Sharon Ostmeyer paid a lawyer to draw up and type the exhibits for herself on the church computer and drove to my house with, at 20 minutes to 9 on a Tuesday, is the paper that put my father's money permanently out of her son's reach. She built the wall. I just made sure it was built right. I still work at the store. Wayne gave me my hours back in November and did not mention it, and I let him not mention it. I am still a commissioned notary in the state of Kansas. I renewed in March. I did not buy anything. I want to be plain about that, because people always want the part where somebody buys something. The car finally went in December, the transmission, and I bought a 9-year-old pickup off a lot in Lansing and paid for it out of my checking account like a person. I moved back into the house on Ottawa Street in November after the locks came off her name and went onto mine. Dee Wenzel brought over a pan of bars the first night, which is how that street says a thing. And the last time I stood in that kitchen before I sold the house, in the spring, The table was empty and wiped down, and the chairs were pushed in. There was one cork coaster left in the middle of it, alone, out of the set of 6. I put the house key down on top of it and left it there. Then I went out and got in the truck, where my father's box was riding on the passenger seat with the belt across it, the way it had ridden all winter, with the letters still bled a little at the edges, and Brubaker W still perfectly easy to read. I'm Clara, and this is my channel. I love making these stories and sharing them with people across the world. If this one found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.